Hello friends, welcome to Coding Garden with CJ. Welcome to Fun with React Render Props. So today, I thought it would be fun to learn about render props and build some reusable components. I've been working a lot with React at my job recently, and the more I code, the more patterns I see, the more libraries I find, and I found some interesting things that I'd like to show you and like to explore with you. Before we get started, let's say hello to all the wonderful people in the chat. Hello, Alan. Welcome to the stream. Hello, Hydra. They said they had to go, but thanks for stopping by. Oh, they said they're going to sleep. Rabbitworks says they have to go, but they're stopping by. Hello. Hello, Motivation Maxed Out. Can I ask you a question before you start everything up? Feel free to ask the question now. Maybe I'll get to it before I start, but I can probably find a pausing point while I'm doing stuff as well. Hello, Vias. Welcome to the stream. Bob's Paradox. Welcome. Jeff. Welcome to the stream. Jeff says, I love you. I heart each and every one of you. Nick Z. Welcome to the stream. Hello, Wally. Welcome, welcome. Jillian. Anthony says they were watching my Mac setup video. Awesome. Hello, Amy. Welcome to the stream. Andreas. Hello. Mr. Taylor. Welcome. Alan says, CJ stream casted on my TV while trying to put my 3-week-old son to sleep. Alan's son, just go to sleep. You know, just go to sleep. It's not hard. Puggles, hello. Hello, Danielle. Welcome to the stream. El Barate, Joshua Ferris, Mahadi, Bian Aim. Hello. Hello, Daniel Garden says, hello, Garden family. Mahadi says, and hello, says, please make more videos on React. I probably will. I've been writing React daily. I've been writing a lot of React code lately. Hello, Sean. Welcome to the stream. Cool. And also, this is the first time I am streaming on my new streaming computer. It's technically just like a high-spec gaming computer, but if you remember watching the stream a while back, I used to have issues where like one camera would cut out or the video would be delayed. I'm hoping that with this new setup, things will be better. I could probably get an extra camera and do like a whiteboard or something like that. So if at any time something like the audio gets weird or the video gets weird, let me know, because this is the first time I'm ever using this computer to stream. Cool. Question from Motivation Maxed Out. Can you make an eBay scraper with Node.js and Vue.js? I'm having problems with promises in Node, and it would pay you if you want. I usually don't accept payments. It would be fun, maybe something fun to explore, like on a Newbie Tuesdays or something like that. Mr. Taylor has an off-topic question. I'll answer it. What would be the best way to create a full-stack Vue.js Python Webpack app website? Actually, I guess I don't know if I'll answer. I've never really done that, but if you did want to incorporate Vue.js and Python, you would probably use something like Python Flask on the back end, because Flask is a lot like Express in that it's very simple and really good at making JSON APIs. And then you would just build your, you would have that totally separate. And if you've watched any of my videos, it'd work in a very similar way. You have your Vue.js app that's totally separate using like the Vue CLI that includes Webpack and everything. And then your Python Flask app is totally separate, but that's the backend that connects to the database and stuff. So maybe that helps a little bit. And hello, Sanjay. Welcome to the stream. Danielle says, CJ's moving on up. I am. It was a really good Cyber Monday deal. And also, I'm hoping that getting this new streaming setup will make me want to stream more often. Like, I definitely want to, and I've been talking about wanting to, but I've been busy with my job. Regardless, let's get started. Cool. So I titled this stream Fun with React Render Props, but first, let's just talk about what are render props. After that, we will build some reusable components. I found this really cool library thing called Create React Library that actually allows you to create your own library that other people could like download from NPM and use in their React project. So we'll use that. Maybe you can use some of these components that I use. And as I build these components, if you have any ideas for other components that I should build, feel free to throw it in the chat. It would be fun to explore. So first, what are render props? Let's take a look at the React docs. And it says, the term render prop refers to a technique for sharing code between React components using a prop whose value is a function. So if you're using various component libraries, you might have seen this pattern where they provide some sort of component for you, and you have to specify a prop called render that is a function that ultimately is a component. It just returns some JSX. But that function gets access to some data or some thing. And this isn't totally new. People have been doing this for a while. And it's really... I mean, I don't want to say it's not exactly a feature of the language. It just kind of works that way because of how React works. And this pattern caught on, and a lot of people prefer this over this other pattern called higher order components, which is where you pass your component into a function that gives it new props. This is another way of doing it. But in the current code base that I'm working in, I've found some ways of reusing things by following this pattern. And I've also thought of some interesting, like fairly simple components that might make it easier for a beginner to use React. And we'll see that whenever I try to create some. This topic in the docs is a little bit dense. They do have some example with like this mouse tracker component, where basically throughout your app, you might want to know where the mouse is. So this is something reusable. Instead of having like a parent component that has to pass down all of the data of like where the mouse is, this is a component that you could put pretty much anywhere and it has access to the mouse coordinates. So this is like a full component that's tracking the mouse. And then they want to extract it. Let's go to how they make it a render prop. Right about somewhere. Not there. Not here either. I don't know. I'm going to show some probably easier to understand examples, but something like this. So like you have the mouse component, and it has a render prop which gets access to mouse. And mouse is an object that has like XY coordinates. And you could literally use this component anywhere in your app. And inside of this little function, you have access to the mouse coordinates. And you can see the implementation details there. I'm going to stop talking about these examples because honestly, they're kind of hard for even me to understand. Oh yes, and there are questions in the chat of like, what are props? Let's talk about that too. So let me catch up on the chat. Hello, Vias. Vias asks, what is the best way to request multiple APIs in React? It depends greatly on how your app is structured. Like if you have a Redux app, then typically your API requests are going to go in your store, like in actions. And if you want to hit multiple endpoints, maybe you want to do something like a promise all, where you can request multiple, get the data back, then put it in your store. Hello, Alco. Welcome to the stream. Mr. Taylor says, your Vuetify.js tutorial was awesome. Was waiting for something like that. Appreciate it. Hello, Andrew Lane. And Motivation asked the question, CJ, are props things that you pass along data to parents and children? Why, yes, they are. And so maybe we'll take a step back and like as I build these things, we'll just talk about like what are props. We'll see some examples of components that have props. Definitely we can do that. And Hydra is saying, oh, it's a nice, it's a tutorial, perhaps edited and uploaded later. I have like never edited my videos, but this video that you're watching will be available immediately after the stream is over, so you can skim through it. And hello, Chad. Welcome to the stream. If you all saw a while back, I did the pairing episode with Feathers.js. That's the Chad that I was pairing with. Welcome, Chad. Oh, thank you, El Barate. It doesn't look like you're plugged in. I'm not, and I have 20% battery. So I need to go get my charger very soon. Cool. Mahadi, one last thing. Mahadi asks, make a video on Redux, please. Redux seems hard for me to understand. Check out the video that I did on Redux. I have gotten good comments on it. Go to my channel. It's on here somewhere. There's a playlist, I think, that has like a bunch of React videos, but also if you just search Redux Coding Garden, you can probably find it. Yeah, Intro to Redux with React. Cool. I am going to get this app generated, and while that's happening, I'm going to go get my charger. So this is a thing that I found. It's called Create React Library, and it essentially allows you to create a library of React components that could be published on something like NPM. So I'm going to create all of these reusable components, and I think at the end I definitely will publish to npm. And then other people could install this library and use these components that I created in their app. So probably we need to come up with a name. What should we name this? Start brainstorming. What are we going to call this library of components? But yeah, I'm going to run this, and while it's running, I'm going to go get my charger. And here is how you use it. You can install it globally, or you could just use npx. So that's what I'm going to do. So in this directory, we're going to say create React library. Let's just call it, for now, we're going to call it fun render props. But in a bit, we'll come up with a good name for it. Sorry. So I don't have it installed globally, but you can do npx, and that will install it and run it all in one go. OK, while that's running, I'm going to get my charger. Right back. Hello, Supa. Hello, Ran. Hello, Ronald. Welcome to the stream. Oh, it's asking me for the name. What should we call it? So, to give you an idea, or an idea of the types of components that I'm going to create, I'm going to create a component called if, and it's going to have a few props on it. It's going to have a prop called condition, and it's going to have a prop called then, and it's going to have a prop called else. If the condition is true, it will render the then prop. If the condition is false, it will render the else prop. So that's a fairly simple component. Like in React, you can do this with a ternary, but I thought it'd be fun to do it with render props. The other one is a for component or a map component. So in React, if you want to iterate over a list, typically you have to have an array and do like array.map. But this will allow us to, we can have a prop that will store the array of data, and then we'll have a render prop that will be essentially the render function for each element in the array. And it will just do what array.map normally does, but with a component. Our flex component is basically just going to be a flexbox container with all of the flexbox props that you know and love, like align content, align items, justify content, flex direction. Basically, it's a component that is a flex container where you can specify all of those properties, and it gives you a flexbox. This one will be fun. We're going to create a component called fetch, which will have a prop that's like some URL. And then we'll have other props that are like loading, error, and render. And depending on the state of the fetch, we can display something, but then ultimately display the data. And this is essentially like just a wrapper around state and having to make an API request. And it'll make it really simple to just render some data on the page. We might do this one. This one I was thinking of, basically it would allow you to create state on the fly. So instead of creating state in your component, you would have literally a component called state with some props like state and render, and inside of your render you could access the state variables. I don't know. So thinking about these types of components, what should we call it? I think for now I'm just going to call it fun with render props, but think about it. Like these are like useful, reusable things. What should we call it? Fun, reusable. That's my name. GitHub repo. Sure, and we can update this stuff later. This is just in the package.json. And let's use Yarn. I think I have it installed. We will use the default template, and away we go. Daniel is saying React Garden tools. I like it. Let's create a list. That's awesome because it's the coding garden, and these are tools for your garden, your code garden. That's cool. Yeah, so if you missed it, this thing that I'm running will essentially bootstrap an app with some basic components, and then also it creates an example folder where you can use your components. And it essentially allows you to bundle them up so that they can be distributed as a library. I like it. Ben is saying, call it very helpful tools that you might not use. Fun props. That's a play on like fun function. I kind of like it. I guess the other thing is the people using our library aren't going to necessarily care that it uses render props, so that doesn't technically have to be in the name. I kind of like this React garden tools. We could have like fun little, I guess I don't know if there's any emojis, but like little garden rakes and stuff like that. And I think this thing, yeah, so this thing is done. There is a question from Motivation. Why do you always use Airbnb lint? Why not the other ones? It's just what I have gotten used to, and I use it at my job. We have pre-commit hooks where you can't commit code unless your code passes the Airbnb linter. So I just use it on a daily basis. It has a lot of things that I like by default. There are some things that I turn off. If you've seen some of my older videos where I'm using Vue.js, there are some rules that don't exactly make sense in Vue.js, so I turn them off. But mainly just because I'm used to it. But you're right, there are a lot of other ones out there. Puggles is asking npx. So when I ran this command, I used npx. This stands for, like, I think np execute or something like that. But normally, if you want to use something that's you have to install globally, now you can use npx instead. So in the past, you would have had to have installed this globally, and then after it was done installing, you could use it by just saying create React app. But npx allows you to install it and use it all in one go without having to install it globally. This is my break timer. Let's take a quick stretch. Whew. Yeah, everyone, React Garden Tools. Honestly, I think I'm going to regenerate this with the right name, just so everything is there by default. Removing that folder, and we're going to do it one more time. Wow, there's a lot of stuff in there. Okay. React Garden Tools. There we go. And so typically when you use npx, the second time you run something, I think typically it's a little bit faster, but maybe not. You're noticing that it literally has to download the entire Create React library app before it can run this. Yeah, React Garden Tools. Tools for your code garden. I love it. Thanks for the name. Who came up with that? Was that sorry. Default? There we go. Yeah, that was Danielle. Thank you, Danielle. Cool. A question in the chat. CJ, I've always wondered, in all your videos, you drink LaCroix. Is it alcohol? What the heck is LaCroix? No, LaCroix is bubbly water with a hint of flavor. And this is actually a different brand. It is called Bubbly. This one's mango flavored, but 0 calories, 0 sugar, 0 sodium, and it just slightly tastes like mango. And it's carbonated. And they have all different flavors. My favorite LaCroix one is probably passion fruit. It's really tasty. And hello, Isaac. And hello, Izza. Welcome to the stream. Okay, so we ran that command. It generated this folder. And now we can go in there. And if we do a yarn start, this is actually going to start up the tool for like bundling the app so it can be used. And so that will just sit there. And this also generates an example folder. And this is just a React app that is using the components that we're writing in this library. And if we do a yarn start here, this should open up the browser and show you our, I think it initially has one example component. Cool. Yeah, so there's this example component. Awesome. Let's take a look at the code. So it generated this folder. I believe it's using Rollup, which is a tool like Webpack, but it's a different tool altogether. And it essentially takes all of the components in this source directory, bundles them up, and then you can use them. So we can see, for example, this index.js is the example component that this library comes with. And it has a prop called text, and then it has some styles and just applies like a black outline to the component. And I got a super chat from Rabbitworks JavaScript. Rabbitworks says, "Thank you, CJ, for all of the passion towards teaching JavaScript. I have learned many invaluable skills from Coding Garden. Avid follower, now supporter." I appreciate it, Rabbitworks. If you send me a DM on Discord, I can add you to the droplets role, which is people that have donated before, but really appreciate that. Yeah. Motivation says, "I want to pay CJ to do something." Please don't do that. I don't take donations to build things. I take donations out of the goodness of your heart. In return, you get to watch my videos. But like I said, it's an interesting topic. We might explore it on one of the noob quests. Okay. So basically, this component, you give it text, and then it wraps it in like a black box. And then in example, we can see how it's actually used. So we bring in example component from React Garden Tools. Isn't that great? We have our own little library name. And then we use it here, and this just puts a black box around it. And this is the result. So the question came up, first, what are props? Props are ways of passing data into components. So when you look at them, and if you're familiar with HTML, it looks like an attribute, right? It's an attribute on some element giving it data. Technically, it's not an attribute. It is a prop, and we can pass it some data. So in this case, the prop called text is getting the value modern React component module. And now inside of the example component, we have access to a prop called text, and we can do whatever we want with this. In this case, it's just going to show it inside of the component. So if we look back at example component, in here, you'll notice it's getting text from prop. So this.props.text, and then it can actually use it in its own render function. So it's basically a way of taking data and passing it down to a component so that the component can do something with it. And we're going to take heavy advantage of that. If you're newer to React, there is some weird syntax in here. This is known as destructuring. We could also write this as this.props.text, and it will work the same way. This is just a way of grabbing that text property off. But essentially, inside of your component, you have access to this.props. Any prop that is specified on the component, you'll get access to it inside of the component, and you can pass anything down here. Cool. So that's our example component. That's props. Let's talk about, or let's build some components, honestly. Let's do that. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this example component and get rid of these styles. And yeah, I'll get rid of these styles here. And let's create a new file, and I'm just going to call it if.js. So this is going to be a React component called if, like capital if. So we're going to export a class if. It's going to extend component. For now, we're just going to say this is the if component. Okay, so we have a component here in this file called if.js. So one thing I'm going to do is in index.js, I'm going to export that component so that it can be imported elsewhere. So I'm going to say export if from, and then give it the relative path to if. What is this complaining about? Declaration. Or statement expected. I don't know why it's complaining. It should be okay. So this file exports if, and now when we actually want to use it, we should be able to destructure it and say, from React Garden Tools, get the if component. And then right about here, we're going to use the if component that we just created. If, like that. Let's see what happens. Did I break something? Yeah, there we go. It works. I'm getting just weird linter errors. So now inside of my example app, I'm bringing in the if component from my library that I created, and then just using it in my render function. Awesome, right? Later on, when I publish this to NPM, anybody could NPM install it and then literally use this if component in the React app. Right now, it's not that great, but they could use it. Cool. Zoom to it. Let me catch up on the chat. Sorry. Is a Savage is saying, CJ, if you could zoom in, that would be great. Do you just mean make the text a little bit bigger? I keep zooming it in and out. Isaac is asking, does React come with its own styles, or would you pair it with something like Bootstrap? You could. You could write all of the styles yourself. You could use a component library. At work, I use a component library called Material UI. And it's essentially a set of components that you can install and use in your app. And they come pre-styled. So you get things like an app bar, and you get things like buttons. And if you want to use them, you import that component from the library. So we're essentially making a library. It's not going to be this great, but we're making a library like this where you can import a component and then use it. So this is what I use at work. They're like pre-styled components. You could pair it with Bootstrap. You could pair it with other CSS libraries. There are other component libraries. React ultimately is just JavaScript, and what you do with CSS is up to you. Cool. Ben Sao is asking, what exactly is a component? I feel dumb for asking this. Do not feel dumb, sir. A component is a way to essentially wrap up some functionality. So let's make an even easier, well, not easier. Let's create a new component. We're going to call it hello world.js. And this is going to be a very simple component. It's kind of similar to what my if component looks like right now. That just says hello world. Okay, so a component has this thing called a render function that's going to return some JSX that ultimately will end up as HTML or as DOM elements on the page. So we can do lots of other things inside of this component. Right now it's very, very dumb. It just has this one render function. And then if I want to reuse this somewhere else, I could import it in. So let's export it from here as well. So we're export hello world from hello world. And then in our app, we can actually import it in. So I'm going to import if, and I'm going to import hello world. And now I can use this hello world component. And this is a very trivial example, but the idea is it's reusable. Like it encapsulates, it's another big word, but it basically hides all the nitty-gritty details and lets you just use the component like this. So that Material UI thing I just showed is a good example of that. So instead of having to specify all these styles and animation and hover effects yourself, you literally just import in button, put it in your render function, and it gets all of that by default. But if we looked at the source code for this, it has a lot more going on. It has custom CSS and styles and animations, but it's hiding all of that from us. So essentially, it's a way to encapsulate functionality and reuse it in some other component. Cool. And we could get more interesting with this. So we talked about props a little bit ago. So let's say we pass down a name to hello world. So let's say I pass down like CJ. Now inside of hello world, I have access to name on props. So let's say right here, instead of saying hello world, we say this.props.name. Now, whatever name you pass down will get rendered. So it says hello CJ. But it's reusable. So I could do this over and over again. Who asked that question? Ben did. So we'll do hello world with Ben and hello world with motivation. And each one of these is a new instance of the hello world component, but we're passing it a new prop. And inside of here, essentially we don't care what you pass. Whatever you pass is going to get put right there in the component. So now when we show it, we see hello CJ, hello Ben, hello motivation. Cool. My linter is yelling at me because it's missing in props validation. Regardless, this thing. Okay, we'll do it. We'll add prop validation. So one thing about making reusable components is you want to let the world know what props are required on your components. Essentially, if someone were to use this component, my editor or their editor could tell them this component requires a name prop, and if you don't specify it, you're going to see some errors. So we'll add prop validation that makes it so that you must have a name prop on this component. I'm going to turn off code lens. Line blame annotations. Yeah, okay, that was really annoying me. Okay. But yes, let's add prop type validation. So this comes built in. It's already installed with the prop types library. And essentially, it's a way of telling the world what prop types your component requires. So on the class, we create a static property called lowercase prop types. It's an object, and it's an object of keys that will be the props that you're expecting on this component. So I'm going to say name is prop types.string, and it is required. So now, when anyone out there is trying to use my component, I'm enforcing that they must pass down a name prop. And maybe if I actually use the hello world component, yeah, I was just going to see it might autocomplete that like name is a prop that I need. Maybe not. Puggles. But when you're writing components, typically you want to do this so that the outside world knows what props need to be passed down to this component. Okay, let's do a little bit of destructuring. Let's say like name is equal to this dot props. And then now we can just use name right here. Great. Hello, hell world. Hello, maybe that's why it didn't work. Let's see. Hello world. No, I don't know. And it works. Cool. So we've kind of got the basics of like props, prop types, creating components. Now we're going to actually get into what are render props. Question, what do you think of skeleton for styles? I think it's really great for basic styles when you don't want to have to create your own. Beyond that, you typically want to do a bit more customization, but it's really great for just getting up and going. Puggles is asking, are those export things from index.js file a way to export stuff using React Garden Tools instead of Path? So if you're familiar with node.js, the way you used to have to do it would be something like import that, and then export an object with like if and hello world on it. Well, not, I mean, these would be like requires or something like that. But a shorthand is basically saying from this file, I want to export something called if, and I want to export something called hello world, which is whatever was exported from this file. And then now that allows me to destructure it here. That's the main reason I'm doing this. So when I bring in the library, I can just pick and choose the ones that I want. Cool. Ronald is asking, is it a good idea to add a prefix to the component names? It might be, but in this case, imports actually allow you to rename things. So if there was some sort of name collision, you could say like import if as if component. And then you'd want to use that here. However, because I'm using a capital I in if, this will not interfere with lowercase if in JavaScript. So because I'm using, and because React requires capital letters in your component names, it shouldn't interfere. Yeah, and some other people are mentioning maybe we prefix them with RGT, React Garden Tools, -if. I'm going to go without the prefix because it just looks cleaner. Like I said, you could alias it if you need to. Yeah, in motivation, the answer that RabbitWorks just gave. It's good for prototyping, minimalist CSS, but if you want anything more, you might use something else. Okay, so we got the basics of props. Let's talk about render props with this if component. And so the way I want to use this if component, let's just say, we'll just have that there for now. But the way I want to use this is I want to have this component called if, and I want to have a prop on it called condition. And for now, we'll just say the condition is true, but we could pass anything into that. And we'll say if the condition is true, then I want to render this function. So we'll just throw like an h1 that says, yay! Else, we want to render something else. Boo. Okay, so this isn't going to work because I haven't taken these props into account yet, but the then prop and the else prop are known as render props because they essentially take in a render function, and that render function will be called if the component decides that it needs to call that. So this is how this component is going to work. Let's make it work. So now in if, we need to get all of our props. So we're going to destructure everything. We need to grab the condition. We need to grab the, what did we call it? Then. And we need to grab the else from this.props. Now, you'll notice my editor is highlighting this because it's like, hey, else is a built-in keyword. Let's alias these things. So let's call this our else function, and let's call this our then function. And we're grabbing it from our props. Right now it's complaining because I don't have prop type validation. Let's add it. So we'll have our prop types. Condition is going to be prop types dot bool, and it is required. And we need to bring in prop types. And then is prop types dot function, and else is also a function. Okay, so we're validating that we have these props. Now, how is this going to work? So in our render function, we have access to all of these props. So really, I'm going to write it in a more verbose way first, but then we can like even use ternaries if we wanted to. But basically, we'll say if condition, then we're going to return the then function, just like that. Else, we're going to return the else function, just like that. What is this complaining about? Extra semicolon. Yeah, so right now my linter doesn't like semicolons, but I'm used to adding them. So let's clean this up a little bit. And this is our very basic if component. So if the condition is true, it's going to run that function and render what was ever in there. If the condition is false, it's going to run our else function and render whatever was in that. Let's see it happen. And we should see, yay, cool. But if we set the condition to false, we should see, boo, cool. So this is very basic render props, but the idea is you have a prop that accepts a render function. I'm going to show another way of doing it where essentially you use the children of the component. Yeah, but let's catch up on the chat real quick. Motivation says, CJ is my hero. React seems so complicated, and he makes it look so easy. It's only because I spend 8 hours a day writing React, and I have been for like the past month. Is a Savage is asking, can you use async await instead of then? In this case, we won't need to because there is no asynchronous stuff happening. There's no promises involved. These are just basic functions that will be rendered. So yeah, we won't need to do that. Cool. So that's great. Let's see some other ways we might do this. So let's say we have the if component, and we put our condition on there. Let's just say it's true. And let's say instead of specifying a then property, we actually just want to say, okay, if that was true, then render this out. Like that. And really, we don't even really need these parentheses. Basically, we can do that. It's going to be broken right now because I didn't take something into account. So on this use of the if component, I'm specifying a then prop and an else prop. But in this use, which I haven't exactly accounted for just yet, I'm not specifying those props. But if we look inside of the component, I'm just calling them no matter what. So we can do some basic stuff here. So we can say then function and then function. So that will basically just say, if it's defined, then invoke it. Otherwise, do nothing. And then if neither of those things were defined, then just we're going to return null. Why is this complaining? Unreachable code detected. Oh. Well, really, we want to be able to return null. It can get even weirder. So we'll say that if it's defined or return null. Same thing here. So if it's defined, return the then function invoked or return null. Okay. Cool. Now, this first one is working, right? But we have not taken into account, what if we don't specify a then prop or an else prop? What if we specify a function as a child? Then we can actually access children from our props. So let's also grab children. And children is essentially whatever is a child or children of this component. And so what we'll do is the logic is going to get super hairy. We'll say the then function. So if the condition is true, let's just do this. So if the condition is true and children is defined, then we're going to return children invoked. Okay, so we'll add that in our prop type validation in a second. But essentially, children is now a prop that we get access to because we've specified stuff in between our opening and closing component. So in this case, it didn't specify a then prop and it didn't specify an else prop, but it did specify some children. So we're going to say if the condition was true and they did specify some children, then just render out the children. Otherwise, if it's true and they specified a then function, render out the then function. But if it was true, they didn't specify either, return nothing. If it wasn't true and they specified an else function, render the else function. So it's getting a little bit complicated, but to the outside world, it seems very convenient. And there we have it. We have access to yay again. And let's just for kicks, let's see what children actually is. So we're going to look at this in the DevTools. So children is a function, right? And ultimately, it's like a React render function. So you're seeing like this weird Webpack stuff. But it gets set that way automatically by React if something is defined as a child of the components. So that's great. Let's put it in our prop type validation. We'll just say that children must also be a function. Cool. And it's working. This is fun. Let's make it a little bit more complicated though, because right now we're just seeing condition true, condition false, but you can literally put anything in there. Let's just say like 10 is greater than 100. Obviously that's true, but it's an expression that will be evaluated. Or 99 is less than 100. That's also true. But whatever is inside of here is going to be evaluated, become a Boolean, and then we can use that inside of it. So it works exactly the same way, but we can actually use expressions. And we could even use something from state. So like, let's say I had some state on this component. Let's say show is initially true. and we'll grab show from our state right here. So let's grab show is equal to this dot state, and now we can actually use show in our condition here. And now they're both true, so they render like that. But then we could add something that actually changes it. So what if we had a button that just says toggle show? And when this button is clicked, we'll run a function that will update our state to set show to false. But because both of these are just using the value from state, it will automatically render the corresponding one. So we'll say this dot toggle show, and then we need a function on our component called toggle show. We're just going to do this dot set state. We'll get access to the previous state, and we want to set show to be not previous state dot show. So basically that'll just toggle it on and off. So now if we click the button, everything goes to false, and whatever was the else, or in the case of the children, it just renders nothing. There isn't exactly a way of specifying two children. We could make it interesting. I just thought of an idea, but this will just work all day long because both of those things pass down the props, the thing re-renders, and we have this beautiful, beautiful component. Oh yeah, and World just asked, can you add a click event to switch the conditions? And I did, and that's what happened. So when this button is clicked, it will update state to toggle show to be the opposite value. That then gets passed down to the if component, and the opposite thing will render. Cool. Rabbitworks is asking, are you going to focus on React more now on future streams, or is your true love still Vue? I write React 8 hours a day or more, but Vue is still my true love. Just writing React has made me sort of like want to create some sort of library that makes it a little bit easier. This may or may not be easier. Like the way you do this in plain old React, like if we didn't have this component, let's take a quick stretch. And hello, Mohammed. Yeah, and the YKK says Vue.js template is better. I absolutely agree. Like it's more readable. The fact that they have scoped CSS built in and your styles are there like alongside with your component is beautiful. Like React has multiple libraries, multiple ways of solving it, and any React project you go into might be doing it different. You go into a Vue.js project, you're gonna be sure that they're just doing it the way that's built into the language, which I really like. It's one of the pet peeves I have with my current code base. Like we're using Material UI, which uses injected CSS classes, but you define them with JavaScript, and it's a little bit hard to reuse them. I don't know. But one thing I didn't show is typically in React, if you wanted to do some conditional rendering, you'd have to use a ternary. So we could say something like, if show is true, then we have this h1, yay! Else we have another h1 that is, boo! And this typically is how you do it in React. This is a little bit more verbose, but it kind of tells you what's going on. There's your condition, there's your then render, and there's your else render. And they all work the same way. Cool. Mohammed said, CJ rocks. Appreciate that. Cool. Yeah, and so Rabbitworks says, it will be interesting to see your style of coding adapt React into Vue. The other cool thing about Vue.js is you can actually use JSX in Vue.js. Your components can have a render function, and you can do very custom things in there. I've never really explored that on the stream, but the more I write React and JSX, like the more things become apparent to me that like that kind of stuff is possible. Cool. Mohammed says, I use your streams instead of other tutorials. Those are awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so this was fun. We're seeing render props. We're seeing the name itself, render prop, is the fact that you have a prop that accepts some sort of render function. And inside of that component, you can use it. This, I believe, is probably the more common way that you'll see this, where you actually have the function as a child and it gets rendered. One thing I just thought of is, what if we do this? So what if we give it, instead of a function, we give it an object with a then property and an else property. Ooh. This is gonna break because children is not a function, but now we can add the logic. So let's say okay, so if children is defined, that's great. If type of children is equal to function, then we're going to invoke it. Else, we'll assume it's an object, and we're going to actually, let's just say, let's do this. So if children is defined, then we're going to take the condition into account. So if children is a function and condition is true, render the children. Else, if type of children is equal to an object, then we're going to say if condition, we're going to return children dot then invoked. Else, we're going to return children dot else invoked. It's getting really hairy, but the cool thing about this is I only have to write it once and then I can reuse it everywhere else. So basically, let's see if I've done this right. So if we have children, we're going to use them. Otherwise, we're just going to use the render props then and else. If children was a function and the condition is true, invoke it and you'll just see the children. So like in this case, if it's true, it just invokes children. Now in this other case, we're giving it an object with multiple properties. So we're saying, okay, if children is an object and condition is true, then we're going to invoke the then property. Else, we'll invoke the else property. And we need to do a comparison here as well. We need to do, does it exist, then invoke it. Because they could like not specify it. Same thing here. So does the else condition exist? And then yeah, that should do it. Cool. You'll notice we do need to update our prop validation though. Nothing was returned from inner, so we do need to handle this. So and condition else return null. So like if none of that stuff was the case, then it needs to return null. There we go. Okay, but we do need to update our prop types because we originally said that it was a function. Now we can say prop types dot one of type, or is it one of type? Yeah. So it can either be a function or an object. Cool. And that works beautifully. And so because I wrote all of this hairy logic, it actually allows us to do interesting things. So like, what if we specified an if, but we only specified the else? This would still work. Or what if we specified an if, but we only specified the then? This also would still work because we're accounting for if those properties exist or not. Okay. Woo. Cool. This is fun. This is really fun. Okay. Yeah, and Isaac asked a good question. Not exactly applicable to like render props, but just like components in general and breaking things down. So how does one decide to break a feature out into another component? That is, how do you decide? It's kind of a spin on the how do you decide when to write a new class in an OOP focused language. Yeah. I think the way I do it is if I see myself writing the same code twice, like copy pasting, or writing two things that look so similar but maybe only one thing is different, I will break it out into a component. A lot of times, you may just have this idea that like everything needs to be a component and you're just breaking everything out into reusable functions and reusable components. But at the end of the day, are you actually reusing them? That's really the question to ask yourself. But I find myself like working in a very large code base where we were doing very similar things over and over again, trying to find ways to turn it into something reusable. Because the good thing about reusable code is it's less code. And in our code base, we're writing tests. And when you write tests for a reusable component, it's also less tests that you have to write, because all of your tests are focusing on making sure that that component you wrote works well in multiple, like in all these different cases that you can think of. And then when you use it, you really just have to test to make sure that it actually renders. And that way you're also not repeating test code. So that's my rule of thumb. Like if I see myself using something in more than one place, and here's another caveat, that code base is going to be around for a while, I will extract it into a component. Yeah. And hello, Rodri. Rodri says, CJ is the best. Appreciate that. Cool. So this is super fun. This was our if component. And you can use it in all these wonderful ways. Let's go back to the README. We did that one. Okay, let's create a for or a map component. I think I'm going to call it for, just to stick to like what things are called in JavaScript. But let's do it. And I guess before I move on, I'll take a quick break. Any questions on what I have done so far in terms of render props for this if component? You are welcome, Isaac. You know what this needs? Emojis. Ta-da! There's like a party one. Boo. Poop emoji. Oh, that's the wrong thing. Random thought. Can we create an emoji component? How would that even work? I don't know, but that would be fun. Oh, I missed one. Nice. Cool. Hello, Hova. Welcome to the stream. It says, first live stream I've caught in a while. I have not been streaming often. I'm gonna try to stream more. Like, I'm definitely gonna stream tomorrow for Codecadas. I've been wanting to do like the free debugs show where people either write in or comment with code issues that they've been having, and I help them out on stream. Yeah. But yes, more streams coming. JC is asking, how do you type emoji in VS Code? This is just a feature of Mac. So on a Mac computer, you can do Control Command Space, and that brings up the emoji menu. On a Windows computer, you can do Windows key period, and that also brings up the emoji menu. Cool. All right, let's move on to the for component. So in here, I'm going to create a new file, call this for.js. We'll create a component. And for now, we'll just render this is the for component. And then in our index, we'll need to export it. And now we can import it in. Cool. I think one thing I'll do is I'm going to extract out these examples so that they kind of just get out of our way for a second. So in here, let's create a new component called if examples. And we'll just create a React component that basically does all of this except for the hello world part. So now we can get rid of all of this and do if examples. We can get rid of our state here too, because we moved it into the other component. Yeah, so all I did there was I took the state and all of those if examples, put it in this component so you can see all of the different ways of using the if component. Should still work the same way. No, because I need to import it. React Garden Tools. That's a good name. I like that. Cool. So still works, but now all of those examples will not be in our way while we work on the for example. Okay, so we brought in this for component. We're going to use it just like that. And for now, it should just say this is the for component. Cool. Let's comment out the hello world too. Yes, this is the for component. But the way I want to use it is I want to give it like a list of data and a render prop where it will render that for each item in the array or in the list. If you've ever used Vue.js, there's v4. So you say v4 item in items. So we're going to have a prop called in, and this will be an array. So let's just have emojis. We'll have the cat emoji. We'll have the party emoji. We'll have the pineapple emoji. And we'll have the heart emoji. Cool. So we're going to say for in this array. And in this case, we'll actually give it a prop called render. And this will be a function that takes in each emoji or each item, whatever it is. And then we'll just render it out. So here, let's just put it inside of an H1, so it's like a really big emoji. And yeah, that's how we want to use this. We want to give it an array. We want to give it a render prop. And this function essentially will be called for every element in the array. Cool. Right now, it does nothing because I'm not actually using those props in my for component. So let's use them. So let's take a quick break. Whew. Oh, I was reading the chat. Hova is saying, I think I might show up in the code debug live stream. That's great. I actually did create a repo. I don't know if there's any issues on it yet. I called it free debugs. And actually, you can see my sticker, free debugs. Yeah, no issues yet. But I have on here, basically, if you want to submit something for me to help you figure out live on stream, I don't think we'll do any sort of like video chat or anything. Really, I want you to provide like what problem are you having, and then I'll figure it out based on like the code samples that you give me. But you can create an issue on this repo. I have an issue template where you should specify what language or framework is the problem in, what do you need help with, what have you done to try and solve it, what are steps to reproduce it. And then I want you to link to a code sample. So in the README, I have all these different places you can host your code. Like it could be in a GitHub repo, a gist, a code sandbox, a code pen, wherever, someplace that will let me see your code so that I can try and help you with it. But yeah, if you want to submit something, put an issue here. Cool. Yeah, and Isaac is saying, if I can't have Vue vanilla, I'll just make Vue in React. Why not, right? Like, why doesn't this exist in React? Probably because you can create it yourself pretty easily, but yeah, it's fun. It looks nice, right? And I guess I'll just show, oh, yeah, let's show. So right now, if you wanted to do this without the component, typically you would have to say like some array dot map, And then we can just reuse this function. That. And so that will show all of the emojis, right? So this is the way you would do it, just plain old React style. But this for, it's going to be nice. You give it an in property, you give it a render, and it renders it all out. Yeah, Ronald is saying it looks familiar to React Native flat list. Haven't used it myself, but probably. You give it an array of items, you give it a render prop, and it's going to render that out. Spacey Cat says, just joined, so I'm missing something. Is this for component just re-implementing array map? Absolutely. It's just making it nicer to look at. And right now, I haven't done anything, so I'm about to implement it. Cool. Christopher Fitzgerald did all the same emojis in the YouTube chat. That's awesome. Jonas says, I have an exam in about 2 hours and I'm watching you. Wish me luck. I wish you luck, and you should probably be studying. I don't know. But much luck. Okay, so we want this component to have two props. It's going to have in, which is going to be of type array. So let's give it some prop types. Cool. And we'll define our prop types. And we're going to say in must be an array. And it is required. And then we also have render. And this is going to be prop types dot function, and it is required. Cool. This is just complaining because we defined the prop types, but we haven't used them. Okay, so now in our render function, we're going to grab those props from our props. And in is a keyword in JavaScript, so we're going to rename this. We're going to say this is the, let's just call this list. And render, we'll rename this to render function as to not confuse with this render. Okay. So now, really, all we have to do is do list.map and pass in the render function. Ta-da! Cool. What is this complaining about? Extra semicolon, go away. Yeah, that's great. But it's, like I said, this is how you do it with regular plain old React. This is just using render props. Maybe for a beginner, this is easier to wrap your head around than actually like writing out map. Maybe you've never heard of map and you're new to React. So this component just lets you say, okay, give me an array, specify a function, which will get called for every element in the array, and we're good to go. We probably are getting an error about key. Yeah, so we're not specifying a key here. So let's just say the key is the emoji. So that error should go away. And this is just some validation. Emojis should be wrapped in a span, not spam, span, with a role of image. And have an accessible description with ARIA label. I'm doing that. I don't know. Cool. Ooh, I like it. Ronald is saying CJ should start Garden.js with a combination of good stuffs from Vue and React. So it's like a cultivated garden of things I like to use, like component libraries or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. And Hova was going to mention about the key. Yeah, so you need keys in both Vue and in React. I feel like I'm doing what this thing wants, or does it want role is image? I don't like this error. Yeah, Spacey Cat is saying we could use the index as a key. Just call it key. Mainly because we're not like resorting this list or anything like that. If you're ever removing things from the list or sorting, then you probably don't want to use the index as the key, but in this case, it's fine. I'm really curious why this isn't working. Emojis should be wrapped in span. Aria labeled by... I did it. But it's not working. This has nothing to do with render props, but... Yeah, okay. Role, label. Yeah, I'm doing it. You know what? I'm just going to kill my build script and restart it. Ugh. Okay, maybe it doesn't like that they're in H1s. Maybe it wants a specific long aria name. Yeah, that could be. Okay, so let's make this a little bit more complex. So let's say we have some state of, let's say like emojis is an array where each emoji has the image, which will be the emoji itself. And then we'll also have its label. Smiling cat. Cool. And now we will map over this array. So let's grab emojis from this.state. And now our in property is just going to be emojis. And now we'll say aria labeled by emoji.label. Oh no. Oh no. And the emoji is going to be emoji.image. Oh! It's complaining about this one because I have emojis in there. Ugh. Let's not import it. There we go. Cool. Okay, but now we're doing it right. That's great. But this is good because now that we have this array, I'm going to show you that when we update state, it's still going to get rendered here because everything will work as expected. So let's grab another emoji. Let's grab ta-da. And we'll grab one more. Cool. So that seems to work. But now let's actually update state. So let's have like a little form here. We'll have an input. And we'll have a button. It says add emoji, where we can specify the input here, and then we'll put it into this array. So we could keep track of it, so like on change, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to access it from the form, I think. No, we'll use on change. Okay, so when this thing changes, say this dot input changed. We'll make this a submit button. And then we'll say when the form it was submitted, we're going to add the emoji. Okay, So on our state, we'll have our input, which initially is empty. We'll then have our input changed, which takes in the event. And we're going to do this dot set state. We're going to be setting input to be event.target.value. So let's destructure it. So we're going to grab the target, and we're going to grab its value. So then we could just specify the value there. And then when this thing was submitted, we'll call add emoji. So this will be a nice little function with the event. We'll do event.prevent default. And then we will take whatever emoji they entered in, put it in the array, and then clear out the input. So we'll do this dot set state. We're going to grab the previous state. We're going to return an object that has its input cleared out. And we're going to have emojis be all of the previous emojis. And then a new emoji where the emoji image is the current input. And maybe we need 2 because we want the label to, I don't know. Can we just set the label to the input as well? It'll probably yell at us. Okay, but now we have this input. We're going to add an emoji like that one. We add it, and it gets added on there. Cool. We actually don't clear out the input because we're not setting the value on it. So we'll grab input from state, and on here we'll say value is equal to input. So now we should be able to clear out the input. So we want to add a salad. Boom. We want to add a heart. Boom. Cool. So ultimately, that's a very simple thing, but you can see that this component we created is just taking an array. No matter what the array is, if that array changes, this render function is going to get recalled because that's the way React works. Like it knows when set state is called or when props change. So this thing is just going to rerun whenever it needs to, and we have our rendered data out there. Cool. Isaac is saying, if you're preventing the default functionality of submit, why make the button submit to begin with? Because the user can hit the enter key. I think that's the main reason. So if I put an emoji on there and then hit enter, that technically submits it, but I didn't have to click the button. So that's probably the main reason. But it also works when I click the button, it submits the form. Okay. I guess one thing we can do is instead of this render prop, we can do it just like we did the if component, where instead of specifying a render prop, you actually just use the children. So we could do something like, let's get this over here, that like that. So now, zoom a little bit out. Instead of specifying a render prop, you literally give it a function as a child, and that will be what you render instead. Undefined is not a function. That's because we're not accounting for what if they didn't specify a render function. So now to update this, we'll say render function or children. Or just an empty function that does nothing. Do I have to wrap this in parentheses? Yeah. Oh, cool. And then we need to specify children is a function, and render is no longer required because we can either specify a render prop or specify the children. Cool. Yeah, so now it's just one after another. Let's just do a little break statement in here just so they're on separate lines. Cool. So 2 different ways of doing it. We have our literal render prop, and then we're just using children. And now they're both looking at the same array. So now when I add emojis, it's going to get listed on both. Cool. Hova says, I'm going to go. Take care. And I really like your content. Always positive. Thank you so much. See you later. Awesome. So we've made this silly little component, but it allows us to iterate over data. Before I move on to the next one, Flexbox, that'll be interesting. Can anyone think of what else I might want to do with this for component? Like, would there be other ways to render it? Yeah, you tell me. Excuse me. And I'm guessing that the stream is going okay. I mentioned at the beginning of the stream that I'm using a new streaming computer. Actually, I just set up Open Broadcast Studio, and I set up my microphone and my capture cards like right before the stream, so I'm actually very surprised that everything is just working as smoothly as it is. Cool. Oh, interesting. So I have some cool suggestions. So Ross is suggesting even odd. Very interesting. What could we do with that? Like, we could actually give it a prop that tells it whether it's even or odd. Maybe. Isaac is saying render in reverse. I love it. Yeah, so like, what if we just specified a prop called reverse? And if that is true, we actually render the list in reverse. Great, let's do it. Okay, so reverse is a prop type that is a Boolean. It's not required. But we're going to grab reverse from our props as well. And really we'll say if reverse is specified, we're going to do something. Otherwise, we're going to do it as normal. So really what I want to do is I want to make a copy of the list and then reverse it. Well, actually, does reverse change the array? Because I don't want to change the array. I don't want to change what props are being passed down. So let's look at array reverse. I think it returns a copy. I don't know. Let's see. Oh, it's in place. Good thing I looked it up. So by in place, that means it literally changes the contents of the array, which probably is not good. So let's just create a variable. Let's say render list. Okay, let's do this. We're going to call this list prop. We're going to create a variable called list that is initially equal to list prop. We're going to map over list prop. But if they specified reverse, then we'll say list is going to be list prop dot slice. That'll make a copy of the array, and then we'll reverse it. Extra semicolon. List is declared, but its value is never read. Oh, this should be list. Cool. So list prop is what they gave us as a prop. Initially, that's what we're going to use. But if they specified reverse, and if it's true, then we will reverse the array before mapping over it. Otherwise, we leave it the same. So now, yay, we got a reversed list. So if we add something new, add it, it's getting in reverse order. That's awesome. And I guess the other thing is you technically could say reverse equals false, and then it won't reverse it. It just leaves it in the same order. So that's pretty cool. I like it. I like it a lot. Yeah, Worlds suggested maybe add a filter. That could be interesting. Like, we could give it a filter. Okay, so we want that one to be reversed. We could give it a filter that's like a function that takes in the like you get to specify the filter function, but we'll actually put that on the we'll filter it before we map it. Yeah. I mean, technically, you could just do emojis.filter right here because that returns a new array. I don't know. Let's see what other suggestions there are. It's not a bad suggestion. It's just, I don't know if I want to do it. Enrique says, greetings from Nicaragua. Hello. Thanks for tuning in. Ross is saying, even odd is in Angular. It's nice for table row highlighting. I guess I'm just curious how we would give this thing access to even odd. Spacey Cat is mentioning you really could just calculate it yourself inside of the render function. But if we were to pass it down, maybe we pass it as like a third parameter to this function. Quick stretch. Because a map function gives you the element, the index, and the array, and we could give it a last value that is even. It's true or not? I don't know. Bob's Paradox has a good suggestion. A new component that wraps an emoji not already wrapped with the span so that you're not yelled at by the console. I guess at the end of the day, it seems like the same amount of work, right? So, like, let's say we wanted to do emoji and then, like, put an emoji in it. Is that a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? That's great. Technically, we would still want to give it a label. PB&J. I think one thing that would be cool, I'd have to probably pull in a library for this. We could say like emoji type equals poop, and then that just gives you a poop emoji. Yeah. Cool. But why not? Let's this is actually a good example of children render pops. Whoa. And in this case, let's see how this works out. Okay, so I think we're pretty much done with 4. That was great. Let's pull this out into a separate file for examples. Go pull this out, put it in here, move our state into the examples file. Cool. So yes, let's figure out how this emoji component would work, because I think we can make it work without having a function here, right? By just simply having that there. But let's see what happens. Okay, so I need a new component. I'm going to call it emoji.js. Cool. And technically we get the children. And what if we just return the children? Does it work? Oh, we need to export it. So in our index, we'll also export emoji from emoji. That works. Very interesting. So technically, this the children here, it's not a function. Let's just log it. The children is literally just text. I guess it could be anything. But yeah, I believe that it's going to be, if we look at the type of children, it's text. String, yeah. Cool. So, easy enough. But now we could technically like wrap it in a span. And we'll give it role equals image and label equals, let's say the label is just going to be the emoji you passed it, or if you, you can give it a label prop. Or let's just say, we'll just default it to the word emoji. Cool. And let's specify our prop types. Prop types. So say children is a string and it is required. And the label is a string, but it is not required. And then we'll bring in prop types. Cool. Why is this complaining? Unexpected usage of double quotes. Children is declared, but its value is never read. But it is! Look at it right there. Oh, I guess, no. Now it needs to be wrapped like that. There we go. But we're getting an error in our app.js. Emoji should be wrapped in a span and have role image. You know what? It's complaining about this one. Because here it's not wrapped in a span. Technically, when it renders, we are wrapping it in a span. Like, and if we look at the element console, yeah, it's a span with a role of image and the label is emoji. But we could also pass down a label that's like crying. Yeah. So technically, at the end of the day, when it renders, we're doing the right thing, but we're still getting this linter error. Oh well. Yeah, and so Ross is mentioning children can be really anything. So we saw earlier in our if component, we're allowing the children to either be a function or even an object. So if we look at our if examples, in this case, children is a function. In this case, children is an object, and we actually have access to the properties. In this case, children is literally just a string that got passed down, but it could also be a function. It could be JSX. It could be an object. It could literally be anything, which is pretty cool. Cerber is saying, hi there. I woke up at 5 from the streaming notification to say how I adore CJ. You're the best. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Cool. So we created this emoji component, but at the end of the day, our linter is still yelling at us. Oh well. Let's pull out another file for emoji examples. It's going to be super simple. We're just going to pull out this. Okay, let's look back at our README. This one. We created if, we created for, we did a bonus and created an emoji component. In the future, like I said, we could bring in a library and make it so that you just give it like text, like the name of the emoji, and it automatically pulls the emoji in. Cool. Oh, good call. Yeah, Skelly is saying label should be aria label instead. Yes, yes, yes. Is it aria dash label? Yes, you are correct. Thank you. Cool. Now, I have on here, we were going to do like a Flexbox component, but someone did say they really want to see fetch. I have been streaming for like an hour and a half. Let's do fetch, because I may not get to some of these other ones. Let's do fetch. We potentially will do flex too. But fetch is going to be fun. Cool. Oh yeah, Spacey Cat emoji was already in the list. It was at the bottom. I think I added it like right before I started streaming, but I forgot about it. Cool. And Isaac asks, any news on the community app? Very excited to help with it. No news yet, but I do think we are going to, if we look here, we're going to meet soon. I'd like to do some sort of like Hangouts chat where all of the people that showed interest in contributing just get together and we can kind of start to brainstorm and talk about how we're going to run the project. We'll create repos, we'll create a Trello board, we'll get user stories going, all that good stuff, but it should be pretty soon. Cool. All right. The moment that some of you have been waiting for. A fetch component. Okay, so let's get rid of all this stuff. All right. Now, the way this is going to work is we're going to say fetch. We're going to give it some URL. I guess in this case, we'll just give it like a Reddit URL. Oh, is it 3 W's or 4 W's? What happens if I do 4 W's? That's the wrong one. Okay, this is the right one. I think I can do .json and get back a JSON object. Cool. So here's what I want to do. I want to say, okay, here's this fetch component. I want to give it a URL. And then I'm going to give it a render prop that will get access to the response, right? Or like the result. And then we can do something with it. Here, I guess, what does the response have on it? It has data.children. For now, let's just like stringify it. Cool, but this is how I want to create a component that does this. So I'm going to give it a URL. It's going to handle making the request. Maybe I even want to show like, okay, when it's loading, let's do this. And if there was an error, we can render this. And, oh, this needs to be wrapped in curlies, like that. And yeah, this is the component we're going to create. You give it a URL, you tell it what to render if it's loading, you tell it what to render if there was an error, and when you get the data back, it's going to call the render function. Cool. Let's do it. So in our component library, let's create a new file. We're going to call this fetch.js. And we'll go ahead and define our prop types. Cool. So we had the URL, and this is prop types dot string, and it is required. We also had loading. This is prop types dot function. Let's say it's not required because maybe you don't want to specify a loading, and we'll do error and then also render. And that's also a function. Okay, so let's get all of the things off of our props. So we need the URL, or do we? I don't know. We need loading, we need error, and we need render. And this is going to come from this dot props. Let's rename render to render function. Okay. what we need to do is when this component mounts, it should look at the URL and try to make a request. So in a React component, you can tap into component did mount. This function runs right when the component mounts. So let's just log this.props. So we'll see what we have access to. And right now, we're just going to return the loading message. So now in our example, React Garden Tools does not contain an export named fetch. We need to export it. So here we need to say export fetch from fetch. Cool. So now by default, when this thing renders, it just shows the loading prop. So whatever was specified in the as the loading prop, it renders that. I mean, really, we should check if it's loading, show the loading function. Oh, interesting. Ronald is asking for props for headers info. I think we could probably pass that in. So we could say like headers and the response. You can get access to them. Definitely. Let's rename this to loading function. Let's say, okay, if there's a loading function. Right now we know there is one. Cool. But you'll notice I have this component did mount. I'm logging the props. And when the component mounts, we get access to those props. So what I want to do is when the component mounts, we'll have some internal state in this component. So let's create some state. We need to know whether or not this thing is loading. So like, is it fetching the data? We're going to default it to false. Then we probably want the response. Initially, it's null. And we also want the headers. And initially, it's null. And I'm going to have to look at the fetch API to see how we get access to the headers. But I definitely think it's possible. So this is the internal state of this component. Like, is it loading? What is the response value? And what are the headers values? So when the component mounts, we want to set loading to true and to fire off like the request for the data. So let's say this dot request. Let's actually do set state. Well, no, we'll set loading in request because we're probably going to reuse this thing. So we'll say request is a function that first sets state to be loading. So we're going to do loading is true. And we're actually, let's just blank out these values. I'm thinking of a case where like the URL changes and you actually want the data to go away. So we'll set loading to true. This actually accepts a callback function, so we can be sure that when this next code happens, loading is already set to true. And this is where we actually want to do the fetch. So we'll do fetch with the URL from props. So we'll say URL is this.props. So we want to fetch the URL. Here we can use async await. So we're going to say response is going to be awaiting that. We're going to say JSON. And actually, now that I think about it, really we should call this JSON because we're gonna assume that the data that you're getting is JSON, and we're gonna parse it as JSON. We could add extra props that say like how should we parse it, but we're gonna default to we're giving you JSON data. That okay. So we'll say JSON is awaiting response.json. Great. And then we're going to set this stuff on state. Actually, let's just log out response because we might actually here have access to headers. Regenerator runtime is not defined. I have never seen that error in my life. The above error occurred in fetch. Weird. Okay. Oh, is it because like it doesn't know about async await? That might be it. This thing might not come built in with async await. Also, what if I did this? Not in a callback. Yeah, I think for whatever reason, this thing doesn't support async await. Let's see if we can add it really quick. Adding Babel polyfill. Async functions producing reference error. Regenerate runtime is not defined. Does that mean that transform runtime is a necessary step to run the async functions? Okay. Apparently Babel polyfill will do it. This is an older issue from 2017 though. Is that still the way to fix it? In my case, installing Babel plugin transform runtime solved my issues. This is a little bit more recent. Let's look at the configuration. And by the way, what we're trying to fix right now, async await is broken because it's not configured to use that yet. So if we look at our Babel RC, that's great. If we look at our package JSON, which version of Babel is it using? Okay. I like this. Let's use it. So in our component library directory, we're going to use yarn. Babel plugin transform runtime. We may need it in our examples library as well, but we'll see. And then now I can specify this in my Babel config. Okay. Now we will kill it, restart it, kill it, restart it. Oh no. Runtime helpers are not enabled. Either exclude the transform runtime Babel plugin or pass the runtime helpers true option. Oh, to roll up. Okay. This is a roll up issue. I've gone down a rabbit hole. Okay, alternatively, if you know what you're doing, you can use the transform runtime plugin. If you do this, use runtime helpers true. Okay, so now we need to see how rollup is configured. I've never actually used rollup. So we say plugins, Babel, runtime helpers true in an object that gets passed to Babel. And I guess this is where we specify our plugins. I don't know. I don't know. Okay. Hey! We figured it out. So apparently this thing doesn't come pre-configured with runtime generator, which allows us to use async await in our code. But now we can use async await. Okay, I'm going to go back to putting this code in the callback function, really just because I want it to run after the state has been set. And we're making the request. We're logging the response. That's great. We have all this good stuff. There's headers, so we'll put that on state. And now that we have the JSON and we have the headers, we're going to set state. So we'll do this.set state. We're going to say loading is now false. We're going to say JSON is JSON and headers is response.headers. Cool. Yes. And, oh, wow. People, okay, I thought people were freaking out. Yeah, and Isaac is saying no.vinning. And yes, because we're using async await. And this actually needs async on it. Cool. Okay. Now, we're so close. We're so close. So we make the request. We then have the JSON. Then we set our state. We set loading to false. We set the JSON, and we set our headers. Now that this stuff is on state, we can now call our render prop. So we now need to get these values from state in our render function. So we need loading, we need JSON, and we need headers from this .state. Okay, and we need some logic. So we'll say if loading. So notice how I aliased this. So loading is coming from state. The loading function is the prop that they specified. So if loading, then we're gonna return loading function. So if it exists, use it, or just return null. So if it's loading, do that. Else, and actually, we're gonna start this off as loading true. Yeah. And actually, that means that we don't really need to set state whenever we do this. We can just do this. I kind of like that. So basically, wait, what's happening here? That could go away. Cool. So basically, when the component mounts, we're automatically loading. We just say, by default, this thing is loading because we're immediately going to request the data. We get it back, we set our state, and so now the first time it mounts, loading is true, so it's going to run that. Else, we're going to do our render function. So we'll say, whoa, same thing. Does the render function actually exist? Then we will invoke it with our JSON and our headers. Otherwise, return null. OK, moment of truth. Yay! So we're actually rendering out. So right now, we can see in the parent component, I am just stringifying it and displaying it there. Great. These are, sorry, headers. JSON and headers. And actually, I'm getting a little crazy here, but let's pass it an object so we can just destructure the properties that we want. So we're actually just going to pass it an object that has a JSON property and a headers property. Cool. Loading, and it loads it. Badass. Okay, so now we could actually do something with it. So in here, I've got it. Okay, so we're going to use fetch, but we're also going to use that for component that I defined, right? Huh? So in here, we'll say for in is going to be json.data.children, and we have our render prop there. And actually, did we allow for to specify children? We did. Yeah, so technically we could do, might be a little bit cleaner, like this. And we can say, we'll say child. And now we can, let's just show some images. The source is going to be, I don't know, child.something. One thing I probably want to do is, let's just log out the child so we can see what properties we have access to. So it's child.data preview. dot images at 0 dot source dot URL. Copy property path. Okay, so we want an image. So the source is going to be child.data.preview.images at 0 dot source dot URL. Moment of truth. Broken. Okay. These URLs apparently aren't very good. Let's go back to what we were doing. Child.data media embed? No. I think preview is probably what we want. Oh, thumbnail will work. Thumbnail is probably like really tiny. Oh, we could use URL. The only thing is, not everything might actually be an image, but let's do it. Yeah, copy property path. So we want an image, and the source is going to be child. That's easy enough. Child.data.url. All right, all you coding garden people out there in the world, are you ready? So look how cool this code looks, right? Got a fetch component. You tell it the URL. You tell it what to show if it's loading. You tell it what to show if there was an error. We're not actually handling that just yet, but regardless. You now have your render function that gets access to the data from your fetch, and then you can do what you want with it. In my case, I'm using my for component to iterate over the data and show an image. Just like that. Yeah, oh, they're huge. Let's add some styles. Let's do like class is, well, really, let's just do this. Class name is app. Why not? Do we have some styles in here? Cool. So app column count is 3. And image width is 100%. Yes! 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 That's so cool. We forgot to specify a key here, so we do need to do a key. Probably can do child.id, probably exists. Sweet. Or not. If you look back at the data that we're getting, child.data.id, probably. And so really, let's just destructure this. Let's grab data. Nice. I'm excited. I really like, for one, how readable this is, and then also just, yeah, like, it's so easy. Like, this component doesn't even have any state in it, right? We just say fetch, URL, and then display the data with our handy-dandy for component. Too cool. We are still getting an error. We don't have an alt. This probably is like data.title. Cool. Yeah, and if we look at these, Toby, meet Reddit. Reddit, this is Toby. That's that first one. Cool. It's magic. I mean, it's really just JavaScript. So yeah, this is so cool. Okay, let's handle if there was an error. So we weren't doing that before, and really what we need to do is wrap this in a try catch. But let me catch up on the chat. So there's a little bit of a delay, but yeah, people are excited as I am to see how cool this is. Desorolo says, that's magic. Spacey Cat is saying, to be honest, I never thought of wrapping fetch in its own component. I kind of just have fetches and set state everywhere. Yeah. Yeah, I think typically, if you're fetching something from an API, you probably do want to put it on state, because you need to like modify it or use it in certain ways. So, I mean, this is probably only useful if you know that you need to get data and just show it on the page, but you don't need to keep track of it in your store or something like that. Yeah, but if things start to get more complex, then you probably do want to use like set state. I do have on here this component called state where basically it would allow you to just drop it in anywhere, and in one little bitty place you have one little bitty state, and you don't have to create state in your whole component. Don't know. Marianne says, hi, finally made it to your stream. Hello, welcome. And Puggles is asking, what's the difference between the syntax loading function and loading function invoked? So, there's several things going on here. So if we start here, loading is a prop that I'm passing down, and I am passing it a function. So I'm giving it a function. In my render, I wanted to differentiate my loading state variable from the prop that I'm passing down. So this is a way of aliasing it. So loading, which got passed down as a prop, I'm renaming to loading function. So that's the first thing. This little bit of code says, if loading function was actually defined, then invoke it. You could write it in other ways. You could literally write it out like, if loading function, invoke loading function. This is just a one-liner to do that. And really what that allows me to do is, so if we see this, it says loading and it loads. But what that allows me to do is just remove that prop entirely, and then nothing breaks. It just shows nothing because I told it to return null if loading function wasn't defined. So that's mainly what that was doing. Cool. Yeah, and Isaac has it. So basically, we're checking to make sure, was loading function defined? And if it was, invoke it and return the invocation. Cool. All right, so let's handle what happens if there is an error. So what we're going to do for that is wrap this fetch in a try catch. And if there was an error, we're going to set an error on our we're going to like show an error, but for now, I'm going to log out the error, and really we'll look at error.message, because typically that's something that is defined. Okay, so right now, the error isn't going to happen because everything is fine and dandy. We've specified the URL right, my internet's working, that's great. But what happens if I pass it like an invalid URL or something like that? So let's just do this. Like, what if I do HTTPS? Oh no, there was an error. And then I'm right here, I'm logging error.message. So we're doing, when it logged that, it said failed to fetch. So let's do this. If there was an error, we're going to set our state. So we'll do this dot set state. We'll say loading is false. And we're going to clear out the JSON, clear out the headers. And we're going to say error is that error message. Cool. And we'll default error to be the empty string. So, whoa, what just happened? Okay. So now, if an error occurs during the fetch, we'll set error on our state, and then now we can use it here. So let's alias this again to error function. And then now we can grab error from our state. And so we'll say, if it's loading, show loading, else if there was no error, then do that, else we're going to do our error function. So same thing, but instead of render function, we're going to use our error function. And here we're just going to pass in the error. Cool. So now, if an error happens, failed to fetch. Why is that happening? Oh, there's like just some weird styling going on. Cool. So we see that. That's great. But now if we actually specify something that exists, we should see the data. Loading data. Cool. Awesome. Pranjal just asked, can you show me the new computer? Just asking. I don't really know if I have a way of doing that. Actually, I think I can. I can plug in a webcam. Remind me. I'll do that. I'm gonna implement like one more component, and then I'll do that for sure. Anthony says, watching CJ's video titled "Setting Up a Mac for Web Development." Yeah, so I show not only what do I use in VS Code, but also like all the little apps you see me using all the time, and like I show you how I install and set up everything. So that's a good one. And no worries, Anthony. It's been a long day for all of us. Cool. I am really excited about this component. Let's find a different subreddit. r/pics, I think, is a thing. Yeah, so all we have to do is change this URL, and voila. Okay, some of them aren't images, but cool. Let's go back to cute animal images. All right. Can anyone think of other things that I haven't thought of for this fetch component? One thing is, like all of our other components, we've actually let them specify children, which I haven't done here. So what I could do is, instead of specifying a render prop, we can just specify the children, or the child as a function that will actually get rendered. So now it's broken because I'm not looking for the children prop, but I can do that. So let's clean this up a little bit. So children is coming in from props. If there was no error, function is going to be either children or render function. And now we use function instead. All these weird variable names are weird. But then let's say children also must be a function. Cool. So now it works the same way, but instead of specifying a render prop, you can just specify, or you just set your children, and that's what will get rendered. We could do what we did with the if component, where you can give it an object with like render, loading, and error properties on it, but I think this is fine. If you really want to show something during loading, you can specify those as functions there. Cool. Oh, Isaac is saying, make the images link back to the original posts. That's actually pretty easy because we can just do this. Wrap it in an anchor tag. We'll have to move the key prop to the anchor tag, but we'll say href is probably data.permalink, I think it is. We have to prefix it with reddit.com. So this will be reddit.com and then data.permalink. So that should do it. Yeah, so this takes us to the actual post. Skelly is asking what happens if data.url is no longer available. We just see something really weird rendered. So like, for example, if we go to a subreddit that doesn't have images, like Ask Me Anything, yeah, we just see a bunch of non-images. Like we could actually check to make sure that like it ends with JPEG or something like that. But for now, it just doesn't render. Yeah. Oh, Ronald is saying, it seems you're standing and it's already 2 hours long. Please take a seat. By the way, thanks for your time. Amazing channel ever. Appreciate that. I actually prefer to stand while working. I probably stand for about half the day at work and sit for about half the day. Sometimes I sit for more, but it's good to be active. It keeps the energy up. Cool. So that was fun. Let's do like one more component. So we did fetch. We could do flex. So the idea for this was essentially it's a flexbox container where you just use it and specify like flexbox properties. The other one is this state component that essentially allows you to just have your own isolated state anywhere you want. It would actually be very similar to the new React hooks, if you've heard about those. Basically, it's a way of allowing your stateless components to have a little bit of state. I think I'm gonna do this one. Just because these have been like built in complexity. So like fetch was a little bit more complex, state is gonna be even more complex. But let's do it. Okay. Let's just move this into fetch examples. Gotta move our imports. Okay. Moving right along, we now want to create a component called state. And the way we would use this thing is like this. So you would specify like what are the state values that you want to have. So I guess in this example, let's build just a basic form where you I guess we could build on it. We could you have a form where you type in a search term and then we send that search term through fetch to render out some results. Okay, but for now we'll just have like a basic form where you type in a search term. So in this case, our state would be something like search term, and it starts off as an empty string. And then we would have like some sort of render function. And this would be a function. And we would get access to state. So let's pretend we pass it an object and we can destructure it so we get access to state. And in here, we could use it. So let's say we have a form and it has an input. And the value of the input is state.searchTerm. And when this thing changes, we'd want to do something like we need some way of updating state. So what if we also had access to methods where we could change the state? And let's say onChange is methods.searchTermChanged. Whoa! That scared me a little bit. But Marianise just donated $3.40. Thanks so much. A little appreciation and thanks for all the things I learned from you. Awesome. Thank you. Anthony says, have to drive home. Thanks for the live stream. You're welcome. Drive safe. Okay. Yeah, and some people commented, I'm about to flex on my fans. No, I was not going to flex. It would be interesting because I find myself doing this at work all the time, like slight digression, where you need things to be inside of a Flex container. So you either create some new CSS classes or you do some like inline styles to make it a Flex box and justify content and stuff like that. So this would have just been a way of using a Flex component, specifying all of the properties that are available for Flexbox, and then you just put your children inside of it. I don't know. This state one is going to be interesting because if you're following like what I'm... So right now it doesn't exist. I'm just imagining if it did exist, this is how I would want to use it. I think these need to be tabbed in one. Yeah, like that. Okay. So imagine we have this state component. We specify our state. We have our render function. It gets access to the state and some methods, and it can use those in its render. So here we're saying value on this input is equal to state.searchTerm. And when it changes, we're going to call methods.searchTermChanged. So we should also specify our methods. And this is going to be an object that has methods on it. So let's say searchTermChanged is a function. And we're going to need to get access to something like setState, so that way we can update the state. So let's just say any event, the first parameter will be setState, and then the second parameter will be the actual event. And here we would want to do something like setState search term is going to be event.target.value. And really, we could just destructure this. So grab target, grab value. And this is value. OK, so in an ideal world, this would be great. This would just this would just work. But we actually have to write the code to do it. And I guess for now, just to see this working, we could render out whatever search term you're typing here would get rendered right below it because it's calling this function. OK, so now we have to actually write the code for all of this, but doesn't this kind of look like Vue.js, right? Like you have your template, you have your methods, you have any state, and it all just works together. OK. Let's do it. So we'll create a component. We're going to call it state. We need a component. For now, we're just going to render state component. Cool. We will export it so that it is available. OK. And now search term is not defined. Where? Oh, this should be state.searchTerm. OK. We have our state component. How are we going to do this? OK. So obviously, our state component needs state. What is that state? Don't know. Initially, it's nothing. But similar to our fetch component, when this thing mounts, we need to set the initial state, right? So when this thing mounts, the internal state is going to be equal to the original state value there. So we'll do component did mount. We're going to grab state from our props. And then we can just set state. So we'll do this.setState and pass in state. And I guess technically we don't have to define a default state. OK. Easy enough. Now, our render function gets access to methods, render. Really, for now, we can just grab the render function. So let's rename this to render function, and that'll be this.props. And by default, we're just going to call our render function. And this thing is expecting an object that has state and methods on it. So for now, let's say state is this dot state. If it's defined, or we'll just default to an empty object, because I think the thing is the first time this thing renders, it won't have any state until this is called. So we're going to want to pass in something empty. And then we also need methods. And we haven't defined those yet, but let's just say this is like this dot methods or nothing. And we do need to define our prop types. So prop types, we have our state, and this is an object. Prop types dot object, and we'll say it is required. We also have our methods, and this is prop types dot object, not necessarily required. And we also have render, and this is prop types, that is a function. Okay, so now by default we should at least just see an input on the page, and we do. And we are seeing a component is changing an uncontrolled input of type undefined to be controlled. So the issue there is the first time this thing renders, state.searchTerm is not defined. What happens if we set it to null? Or nothing. Cool. Okay. So at least we're getting an input on the page. But right now I'm typing and nothing is happening because we're not actually updating the state. And the error that we're getting right now is you provided a value prop to a form without an onChange handler because methods doesn't exist inside of state yet. So essentially what we need to do is when the component mounts, we're going to need to iterate over these methods and we're going to need to wrap them. So that way, whenever they're called, we pass in set state as the first parameter and the event or any other arguments as the next parameters to that function. Okay, so we need to do that here. And we get access to methods from props. And we're going to want to iterate over it to set it on this dot method. So let's say this dot methods is an object. And then we'll iterate over object.keys of the methods that were passed in as props. And then, well, for now we'll just do a for each. We could have done like a reduce or something, but for each is fine. So for each method name, we want to say this dot methods at method name is going to be equal to methods at method name. So that's the function itself, but we need to pass set state in. So we could technically bind it. Or we could just wrap it in a little function. So this is going to be a function that when invoked, invokes this function. So we'll grab all of the arguments. We're going to pass in this dot set state so that they can use it, and the rest of the arguments. Okay. And I guess another issue here is potentially we're updating methods, but it's on the component, so it's not actually causing a render. So we don't want to set state until all of these methods are defined. So let's do this. So that way this dot methods actually has a value. Let's just log in here. What are our methods? Okay, yeah, so it is undefined, and then it actually has a value. Yeah, this is just a warning that we're getting because of the first render, but we technically are rendering it again. So if I start to type, we get an error. Cannot read property updater of undefined. I think one issue is we definitely need to bind set state. So let's say something like set state is this set state dot bind this. So we create it once, and then we pass it in here. Oh, it works. Okay, let's take a quick stretch. And question from Jan, and hello Jan, is the render prop type supposed to be func, or you didn't complete it? It is. Yes, render is a prop that is a function, so that's technically this. And then we're using it here, but we're just renaming it. But this is working, right? So yeah, it's a little bit weird that say, okay, let's just do this. Otherwise, give it an empty function. That way that error in the console will go away. Because when it first renders, that method doesn't exist. Okay, but now, under the hood, it's setting state, right? This is great. And so, yeah, let's make it a little more complex. So instead of just rendering that out, let's say we have a button here. And in the button, we say search. And this is going to be a submit button. And the form is going to have an on submit. I think what I want to do is, instead of like making the fetch request inside of here, we'll actually use our fetch component. So I'll say form on submit, something like methods.set URL. So by default, our URL will be null. And then we'll have a method called set URL, which will takes in set state. It also takes in the event, so we can prevent the default action. But now we can update the URL on state and then use that in our fetch component to get some data. So how do we search with JSON on Reddit? Let's do this. If we look at Reddit r/earth porn, it's not what you think. It's just beautiful images of the earth. But if we search for something like mountains, I wonder if I can do search.json. Yes, that is so cool. Okay, so yeah, so I can actually pass in a search term like rivers, and that works. Okay, so here is where we'll do set state, not that. We want to specify the URL to now be this. Wait, what just happened? Really, we actually want a callback function. So we're going to get access to the previous state because we want to get access to previous state.search term. But for whatever reason, this didn't copy. But now we're going to set URL to be this thingy, but we want to replace rivers with our search term. and that's going to be previous state.search term, so I can destructure it. Search term. Okay, so we type in our search term, we click submit, it calls set URL. This updates state to have that URL. And so for now, let's just make sure that it's happening. So if I search for mountains and click search, we should be able to look at React DevTools, and our component, or our state component, should have some state search. The inner state is getting set. So if I set this to something like rivers, then it updates the URL. Cool. Okay. You can see where I'm headed with this, because now that I have a URL, let's use the components that I created. So I created an if component, and so we'll use the if component to only call the fetch component if URL is not null. And then we'll use our fetch component. Oh my God. Okay, so we're going to use if, and we're going to use fetch, and we're also going to use for. Okay, here we go. So right below the form, let's just wrap this like in a section. So right below the form, I want to use my if component. And the condition is going to be, does state.url exist? And if it does, then we're going to render the fetch component. Okay. And so now we can use fetch, and let's actually just copy what we did earlier, because it's going to be exactly the same. So we'll use it like this. And now, instead of hard coding the URL, we'll just specify this to be state.url. Do you see what is about to happen? So basically, I have all of, so I had to write a lot of code to get this to work, but if you were to bring these components into your app, this is all you would have to do. You wouldn't actually have to create state on your component. You could just drop this in anywhere. So we have our state, search term, and URL. We have a couple of methods. Search term changed, updates search term on state. Set URL updates the URL on state. And then in our render function, this input is what's setting the search term. And when it's submitted, it sets the URL. We then use our if component. So if state.url actually exists, because that's the way condition is just truthy falsy. So if it exists, then we're going to render our fetch component, pass it the URL, and then render out all of the data. I think we've done it. I think what I will want to do is wrap this in a div with class app to give it that column count. Or really, we'll create a class. Let's call it images. And then we'll put this fetch component inside of there. Yeah, and in our CSS, let's just make this images class with the same column count. Cool. All right. Don't leave emoji component alone. I guess, yeah, could we use the emoji component in here somewhere? What's this complaining about? No trailing spaces. Oh. Okay. This is going to work, and it's going to be freaking amazing, because we have our state component, we have our fetch component, we have our if component, we have our for component. Here we go. Search for mountains. Ah! That's so cool. And again, if we search for rivers, so, and that's the cool thing, like, this isn't automatically updating the fetch component, because we're only setting the URL once at a time. So if I search, it should have set it to loading. Maybe no, so I actually need to update the fetch component to also do things when the component updates. Cool, but this is great. Mind blown from Isaac. Cool, let's catch up on the chat. Yeah, Desoralo says magic. And Puggles asks, what did binding set state do? So what we did in our state was when this function was called, it had a different context, a different this value. So when set state is called, it needs to be in reference to this component, the state component. So by binding this to this, it means when this set state gets called elsewhere, the this value is going to be our state component. So when we use it over here, like right here, this needs to be in reference to the inner state component. So that's why we bound it. So that way when we invoke it, it has the right context. Hopefully that helped a little bit. Bob says, holy cow. Arthur is asking, what's the key to select and push up inside the tag like you did? It varies by computer, but for me, it's just, oh, this is weird, indentation. It's just Alt, I believe. Yeah, Alt or Option on a Mac. If you do Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P on Windows and say, like, move line up, you can see what your keyboard shortcut is. Move selection? I don't know. Alt works for me if you're on a Mac. And then another question from Skelly, why are we wrapping method's method name in an arrow function? So that way we don't invoke it immediately, because we need to give it a function that will be invoked at a later time, not a function that's invoked right now. Technically, we could bind the method instead of wrapping it in an arrow function. I kind of like this syntax better, though. Cool. Okay, so one thing I wanted to do is in our fetch component, we need to account for when the props update. Because right now, we're only doing the request when the component mounts, but we also want to do the request if the props update. So there is another lifecycle method called component did update, and you get access to the previous props so you can decide if you want to do something. So really what we want to do is we want to grab URL, and we'll call this old URL from previous props. And we want to grab URL, and we'll call this new URL from this.props. And we'll just do a little check. So we'll say if old URL does not equal new URL, then we can just call this.request. And this will solve the problem of when the URL on the fetch component changes, it needs to get the data again. So that should help with that. And so now, if we search for mountains, we get mountains. And if we search for rivers, we get rivers. Cool. I'm probably ignoring some errors. Yeah. The prop condition is marked as required in if, but its value is null. Ah, here's some other updates we can do. So in our if component, technically we want condition to actually be a Boolean, so we can just not it. Redundant double negation. I guess I could do this and then swap it. Yeah. But because basically, if I pass it, oh no. If I pass it null, then I actually want it to treat that as a Boolean. Oh. Condition, that's why. It can be anything. And then we'll just put this back to the way it was. Because we'll use the inherent like truthy falsiness of it. Prop condition is marked as required, but its value is undefined. Let's say it's not, doesn't have to be required. The prop type URL is marked as required in fetch, but its value is undefined. I broke so many things. Okay. Condition is state.url. You know what? Let's put this thing back to normal, back to the way it was. Oh, that's why. That's why. Okay. I had switched the then and the else, but I didn't switch them back when I changed it back to the condition. But now condition can be anything, and we just use the truthy falsiness of it here. So that way, right here, technically it's null, but that's falsy, so that'll handle it there. All right, quick stretch. And another thing that I just saw is if we make multiple requests, so if I search for mountains, and then I search for rivers, we actually don't see loading. It just instantly updates. So one thing I need to do in my fetch component is I actually do need to set loading to true when this starts. So we'll do this dot set state loading is true. There we go. So mountains, rivers, cats. This is r/earthporn. Oceans. Nice. Cool. Okay. Let's just take a step back from this code and see how cool it is. I don't know. Jan says, one day I will understand what the heck you're talking about, but gotta start somewhere. Yeah, I have been standing and coding for almost 3 hours now, but weird things happened in here. Ultimately, the only thing that I changed was made this any instead of a required Boolean. Puggles is saying, wouldn't condition be something that is required in if? Yes and no. So technically, if they don't specify the condition prop, then it's undefined, and that's just false. So we would just render the else branch if it exists. So I think that's okay. Like technically, you could literally do an if that only has an else. You could do something like this. And because condition is not specified, it's technically undefined, so that's false. The condition is false, which will render the else branch. So I think I'm okay with that. Cool. This was fun. This was so much fun. And I'm really happy with how this thing turned out. So if you imagine that I didn't write these components today and you just looked at this app, you would see that it's a React app that doesn't have state. So like technically we could make this a stateless functional component. Let's do that. So right now we have app is a class component, but what we could do is create a variable called app that is just a render function that does this. And this will still work. And we don't have any state because this component hides that state from us. And we can use it here. We can update things. We've got our conditional rendering with our if component. We've got our fetch component. We've got our for component to iterate over the data. It's all just so beautiful. Yay. Okay. I think I'm going to end it there. Someone did ask to see my computer, so I'm going to grab a webcam and show you my computer. I don't think it's not that messy. It should be okay. But if you have any questions about this stuff, feel free to ask it right now. And here, let me just throw this in a quick gist. React Garden Tools example. Oh, I guess this should have been public. Oh well. But if you want to take a look at the code, I am going to push this stuff up to GitHub, but if you just wanted to look at the code right now, feel free to take a look at that link. Okay, I'm going to get a webcam. I'll be right back. I'll see you later, author. Thanks for tuning in. So, someone earlier asked to see my my new computer. So, like, hopefully you don't see like how messy my room is. Let's go here. There it is. Cool. Okay, so this, I mentioned earlier that I got a new computer for streaming, and it's like a gaming PC, but here it is. Actually, the other side opens up. I'll show you that. And it came with like a gaming keyboard and mouse. It's part of the bundle. Ooh. Ooh. So it's got a 1080, let me, flashlight. I guess you can't really see anything. I don't know. But it's got a 1060, NVIDIA GTX 1060. It's got, what else? 16 gigs of RAM. It's got a 1 terabyte hard drive with a 256 SSD. It's got like 6 USB 3 ports. But yeah, it's great. Because someone did just ask, how do I transfer my screen from the Mac to my streaming PC? And that is one of these, the Elgato HD60. Actually, I'll show you. I have a link to all of my streaming equipment, but this takes HDMI in from my computer, and then USB 3 to the back. And I have 2 capture cards. Oh, and there's my, this is what I see when I'm looking at the chat and the analytics and OBS and all that good stuff. Cool. Cool. But if you go to coding.garden, there's a link here to see the gear I use to stream. Actually, I haven't added the PC that I got, but I have my mic and all that good stuff. And if you want to support me, you can click these links, and those are just Amazon affiliate links, so I get like a few cents if you do buy something from these links. Before, I was streaming on a Razer laptop, which is like a pretty beefy gaming laptop, but the main issue with that is I only had 3 USB ports, and I have 2 capture cards and USB audio, So a capture card for my PC, a capture card for that camera, and then USB audio. But if I want to add another camera, before I was using a USB hub, and that caused issues because it didn't have enough data flow through it. But this has 6 dedicated USBs, so I'm able to do that. Cool. And you're welcome for showing it. Christopher's saying my desk is still. Yeah, I have a few stickers on here. There's a loading sticker on there. Okay. The last thing I wanted to do, which I have not done, is publish this thing to NPM. So you may have noticed as I was coding these things, I'm just importing them straight from React Garden tools. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to publish this to NPM. And then in your React project, you could do yarn add or npm install React Garden tools and actually use these components. Or just like see how they're built too. So ultimately, this README is what's going to show up on, is what will show up on NPM. So let's make sure it looks cool. So let's call it React Garden Tools. React Tools for your code garden. Coded live on Coding Garden with CJ. And then let's link to this stream. YouTube. This one will show up on NPM. So and we'll link that there. This links to, oh, it shows an image. Oh, it's because it's using standard JS as the linting tool, which someone asked earlier about why I use Airbnb. I'm actually using standard on this one technically. So yeah. npm install save garden tools or yarn add React Garden tools. Usage, I'm actually going to just copy and paste this last example that I created. So I don't need this anymore. So we'll use it like that. See more examples on GitHub. Cool. Yeah, I think this looks great. Let's publish it. Pranjal is asking, will I learn Flutter? I didn't plan on it, but it does look interesting. But we should be able to go to React Garden Tools now. Just in the URL. React Garden Tools. Hey! React Tools for your code garden. Coded live on Coding Garden with CJ. And then there's that last example that I just created. Cool. It does link to GitHub, but that doesn't exist just yet. So let me create that. And actually, I am going to put it on Coding Garden. Okay. All the things changed. Create components. Do the thing. And then I need to create a repo. I'm going to create it on Coding Garden. Then I'll have to update the package JSON. And then I'll bump the version on NPM so it goes there. New repo. React Garden Tools. What was our tagline? React Tools for your code garden. create. Now we've got a repo, not a repo. Cool, should be here. And it is, so there's that lovely link if anybody wants to check out the code. One thing is I need to update the repo URL on npm because right now it links to the wrong thing. So in my package.json, repository is coding garden. Yeah, / React Garden Tools. Cool. There's a deploy? What? Yeah, okay. One thing I didn't do was build it, so let's just do a build. Because I don't know if that's going to get included in the repo. I'm curious if it does. And if not, like whoever is using my library will need to build it. I don't know. Okay, and then we need to bump the version number. Let's just do 0.01 because all I did was update the repository link. And I think that's it. Quick stretch. Push that up, and then we'll publish it. Oh, cool. So it does actually publish the dist version. I like that. Cool. And now if we look at it on npm, when I click this, maybe it takes a few seconds to update. Yeah, because it's currently at version 1.0.1. So yeah, it'll take a second before it updates, but this will link to the actual GitHub repo. Awesome, that was fun. Let's take one last look at this really cool component I built. We've got our state component, we've got our if component, our fetch component, our for component. They're all being used together harmoniously. It's all fun times. Puggles is asking, what are all these GAA, GSS commands? If you look at my dot files, these are just aliases I have in my bash profile. You could put these in your zishrc or whatever you use. But GAA is git add period. GCM is git commit -m. Gpush is git push. So I'll link that. But I found these in a blog post a while back and just like picked out the ones that I liked. I think if you're using Zish or OhmyZish, if you're using OhmyZish, it comes with a lot of these by default. But I'm just using regular plain old bash, so I just have them in my profile. Cool. Okay, that's it. I've been streaming for close to 3 hours, but that was super fun. I'm so happy with what I have created today. Awesome. Okay. I think that's it. What else? What else? Oh yeah, I think somebody donated. Let me just double check. Yeah, so I don't know if I saw this on here, but Marianne's donated €3. A little appreciation and thanks for all the things I learned from you. You're very welcome. Rabbitworks donated $5 via Super Chat. Thank you, CJ, for all your passion towards teaching JavaScript. I've learned many invaluable skills from Coding Garden. You are both very welcome. Thanks for your support. Yeah, I think that's it. I am going to stream CodeCause tonight, so tune in for that. Let's have a look at these wonderful mountains before we go. They're so beautiful. Let's full screen it. Wow. 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 Awesome. Okay. Thanks everyone for tuning in. That was super fun. Everyone was very interactive and giving me tips and hints and suggestions, and that's great. I appreciate you all. Wherever you are in the world, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or night. Until next time, here's this.